Welcome to another episode of I Didn't Know That About My Hometown History.
Hey everybody, so we are here at Fort Hunter Mansion Park. We're actually here to do things a little backwards. I wanted to start this series. I didn't know that about my hometown history with the Mason Dixon Line. We will be doing that video. But the other one, the second one I wanted, because this is so sort of hand in hand with the Mason Dixon Line, is slavery. A lot of people think that slavery did not exist north of the Mason Dixon Line, you know, after it was abolished in different states, because, you know, of course it existed for quite a while, but you know, they would think by the 1800s slavery didn't exist. Unfortunately, it did. So we're going to go into this because this is one of those things. One of the things that this channel does is we have a couple different series called Heroines of Hometown History, Tales of Hometown History, and now I Didn't Know That About My Hometown History, that are very pertinent series because there's parts of history that people don't like to talk about. Up to 15 to 20 years ago, nobody really knew about Black Wall Street in Tulsa and the Tulsa bombings that happened thereafter. History is not always pretty. There are times that history is warts and all. And it's important that we remember these aspects of history, that we understand them and the people that are associated with them, because these people deserve to be remembered. They deserve to have their struggle, the things that they went through, understood and remembered. And, you know, the right word doesn't come to mind. I don't know if there is a one. You know, people should all be remembered. Their struggles should be remembered. The courage that they live with, the honor they live with should be celebrated. And certainly slavery is an aspect of our history that is ugly. It is a wart on our history, is a stain, certainly on the history of humanity, and it's something therefore that we should talk about and we should come to understand better. So this is part of it, and we're here at Fort Hunter Mansion Park here in Fort Hunter, right near Rockville, because this is one of those places that slavery still existed. There actually is a former slave and slave cemetery that is out that way. The family that owned this plantation after it became no longer was a fort, French and Indian War fort. It had sort of fallen into disrepair, but a lot of the buildings were still here. A gentleman, I believe he was a captain or something like that, which I'll figure that out, because I forget what the name is, like McCormick or something like that, but they had bought it and they still had slaves here. This was in essence a plantation. It had everything here. This was a trading post. It had been put here specifically, Fort Hunter, to take care of Fort Augusta, which is up near Sunbury. I believe it had a completely different name, Shamokin or something like that. Back then it was just something along those lines, but this was the port that they would load the boats to take stuff up the Susquehanna to fulfill that fort and to build it. And they had slaves then, and then after this was bought and the current mansion that's here, because the fort no longer exists, they did have slaves here, and they had them for quite a while, which we're going to go into both United States slavery, well, three: United States slavery, Pennsylvania slavery, and then slavery at Fort Hunter. But this cemetery is out there, and I will probably wind up posting the link to Cliff's video, because I'm not physically capable of going out to it because it's on the other side of the train tracks, and right now is a really bad time to try to visit it because the undergrowth is so high, the vines, the jaggers and jiggers and all that kind of stuff. It's like nasty territory. But it is a cemetery where there are a number of people laid to rest, African American descent, ex-slaves, former slaves, and slaves, and it's just neglected. It's not looked after at all. The family cemetery is down at this landscape company. We visited that for the channel before, but we have not been able to get over there. You have to basically go there in the fall. So all that stuff is dead. so you can maybe make it through it and actually see the cemetery. I think a lot of it is it's just non-marked rocks, things of that nature, but it's a shame. It's these people are being forgotten, and that's why this video is important, is that we don't forget them. So we're going to read through these and talk a little bit more about slavery in the North. First off, we have United States slavery. At the birth of the United States in the 1770s, slavery was firmly embedded in its fabric. Blacks stolen from Africa were shipped to America as part of a lucrative trade system. Most enslaved people lived in the South, but about 10% lived in the North. By 1810, the population of free blacks in the North had risen greatly because of the spread of the abolitionist ideology. After 1810, the use of the cotton gin made cotton a lucrative southern crop. This dramatically increased the need for enslaved labor. By the time of the Civil War in the 1860s, slavery had polarized the nation into free and slave states. The struggle over slavery, especially its expansion into more western territories, was the fuel that ignited the Civil War. By its outbreak in 1861, 4 million enslaved people toiled in the United States. The Proclamation of Emancipation, issued by Abraham Lincoln on January 1st, 1863, played a key role in ending slavery nationwide. And this is one of those ugly things, but this is what they would have actually went through. Like these are the boats that they brought. Like they were stuffed in there like sardines. They weren't treated like they were human at all. It was just, a lot of them would die on the trip over. It was just, yeah. And here you have the Proclamation of Emancipation. It was done January 1st of 1863. And there's a map of slave distribution. It's sort of hard to understand. They actually have areas, and then they'll have how many, I guess, were in those particular counties. And then this is an example of what slave quarters would have looked like. Very, very humble. So let's go over to the Pennsylvania side. All right, Pennsylvania slavery. Slavery was entwined with Pennsylvania's earliest colonial history. Governor William Penn, founder of the colony in 1681, owned 11 enslaved people. A century later, Pennsylvania passed the 1780 gradual emancipation law. This allowed for the eventual freedom of children of the enslaved. A child born in 1780 or later would be free by the age of 28. Most northern states had passed similar laws by the 1800s. Enslaved people worked on farms and taverns, in craftsman shops, and as servants. The majority lived in or around Philadelphia, where slaves were imported. The 1790 Pennsylvania census recorded 6,537 free blacks, 3,737 enslaved blacks. By 1810, only 795 enslaved people lived in the state, although the total black population had doubled. Slavery ended in Pennsylvania by the late 1840s. And here's a lithograph that depicts the London Coffee House in Philadelphia, which was a common selling location for merchants and slave traders. And then you have, am I not a man and a brother? Like that, it's emotionally, it just hits you. And these are the type of things we need to see. Pennsylvania provided a glimmer of hope for slaves escaping via the Underground Railroad. Harriet Tubman once said, "When I found I had crossed that line, I looked at my hands to see if I was the same person. There was such a glory over everything. The sun came like gold through the trees and over the fields, and I felt like I was in heaven." And then as a powerful woodcut image comes from 1837 anti-slavery poem titled "Our Countrymen in Chains." So, as a little bit of an explanation, I may be wrong in this, but I believe I'm correct. People that were currently slaves, I think within 20 years had to be released, and a child born in 1780 or later would be free by the age of 28, because basically their attitude towards it was that they weren't equals and that they needed that time to be able to take care of themselves and stuff like that. And it is an awful, gradual emancipation. It isn't emancipation at all. I mean, it is eventually, but it's basically keeping people under enslavement. And, it said it finally ended in Pennsylvania by the 1840s. You actually had states like, I think, New Jersey not until the Civil War did that emancipation come through, and Delaware. So slavery did continue to exist into the late 1840s, which is extraordinarily sad that still happened here. So, slavery at Fort Hunter. From 1786 to the early 1830s, over 20 enslaved people lived and worked at Fort Hunter. Their parents and ancestors had been stolen from Africa. It's the McAllister family, who created all of Fort Hunter's earliest surviving buildings. It was one of the largest slave owners in Dauphin County, along with free laborers. Blacks worked on the Fort Hunter plantation, farming, cooking, and running the dairy. Among them were at least two families, the Craigs and the Jenkins. At that time, Fort Hunter included a farm, a tavern, a distillery, and a mill. Sal Craig fled from Fort Hunter bondage in 1828 when she was about 60. Although owned by the McAllister since she was a girl, they had planned to sell her because of financial reversals. The sales advertisement described her as a strong, active of her age, an excellent washer, baker, and cook, and understands the management of a dairy and soap boiling. By then, the small community of free blacks had formed in nearby Harrisburg and Halifax. Perhaps they provided aid and refuge to Saul, but nothing more is known of her story. This woman ran away from slavery just like Saul Craig had. And then they have the ground penetrating radar, and that's the cemetery there. So they identified a total of 9 graves, 4 of which are unmarked, at the African American cemetery that was once part of the Fort Hunter property. And then these are the known enslaved people that once lived at Fort Hunter: Cato, Charles, Andrew Craig, Eliza Craig, James Craig, Lucy Craig, Saul Craig, Daniel, George Hoofnagel, Hetty Gray, Isaac, Jack, son of Cato, James, Jem, Judy, Hallie Jenkins, Jack Jenkins, Maria Murray, Mary, Nance, Ned, and Tyra. These are people that we need to remember. We need to honor that they lived here and they were enslaved. And there's that Sale, Archibald McAllister, and then they'll run away. This is an unfortunate part of our history, and that was this place here. Beautiful, and it's stunning, serene, but at one time it was a place that people were enslaved against their will. And in the north, this continued much longer than you'd think, into the 1840s, late 1840s even. And that's something that we just don't know about our hometown history because we're not told it, and it's a shame. So as I said, I'm going to put up Cliff's video where he actually visits the cemetery. I think the first time he went to go try and find it was in the summer, and he ran into that problem that I was talking about, where you have like all the thorns and vines and just undergrowth. It's impossible to get to. But he went back in the fall or winter. I think it was January, 4 or 5 years back, and he actually got back there. I'm not even sure. He had said he's not sure with my physical limitations that I'd even be able to get back there, but you'll be able to visit that cemetery on what he can see in that video, and it's actually quite extraordinary. It's moving. Cliff gets visibly upset over it, as you should, and he gets even more upset at it. There's another one where there's a ex-slave cemetery out in like state game lands that's completely neglected. There's like some things around it to let you know, hey, there's a cemetery here, but these are people that have been forgotten and should not be forgotten. And I will also put up the link for Find a Grave, which actually has, so you can go to that site and you can look at the names and remember these people, who they were, the courage that they had, the honor that they had, and go Sal Craig, as she went for her freedom at 60 years of age. And thankfully, we don't know anything more about her, but hoping as she made her way to freedom. We've talked about Joseph Johns and several other individuals of the town of Africa. I hope to get more and more information on that at some point. But this is a part of our history that we need to acknowledge, that we need to remember. We need to remember these people, how extraordinary they were, and the heroes that they were, and they deserve that. So, as always, I want to say thanks for coming along. This is a little more a dour, if you will, sad bit of history, but necessary to remember. A lot of the stuff that we do, we go out on adventures, we have fun stuff, like we go to Graffiti Bridge in Berks County and that type of stuff. But this is one of those essential parts of history that we do for this channel that I feel is so important. We'll be doing more of it now that I'm able to get out to some of these places and talk about what actually happened and what the real history actually was. And so as always, I want to say thank you for coming along, and we will see you at about town.